Picture this. The year is 2009. In a remote corner of Panama on the edge of the Caribbean coast, a group of teenagers are exploring the rocky hills of Cerro Azul. It's a lush, humid jungle, filled with hidden rivers and ancient secrets. But what they found that afternoon wasn't a secret of the past. It was something that felt like it came from the future, or from another world entirely. They claimed to have found a creature, a strange, hairless, pale creature. It was humanoid in shape, but its appearance was disturbing, alien. The local press in a frenzy dubbed it El Extraterrestre de Panama. To the rest of us, it became known as the Panama Alien. Photos exploded across the internet. We all saw them. A pink, smooth-skinned entity sprawled on the rocks, its limbs twisted, its eyes just dark, featureless pits. The story went viral. A creature from another world, found and killed by frightened locals. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, the story went silent. The body? It vanished. No official autopsy was ever released. No scientific paper was ever published. The official explanation that trickled out later was that it was just a rotted sloth carcass. But for anyone who saw those original photos, that explanation just didn't add up. It didn't look like any animal we knew. For over a decade, the Panama Alien became a ghost of the early internet, a mystery buried under conspiracy blogs and clickbait videos. It was a story you'd tell your friends, a weird footnote in the history of unexplained phenomena. Until 2025, when something pulled it right back into the light. In early 2025, something incredible happened. An independent research team from the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama City was doing a routine inventory. They were cataloging biological samples collected over the past 2 decades. In a forgotten corner of a neglected freezer, they found a box. It was mislabeled, Marine Anomaly, 2009. Inside were several tissue slides and a small preserved organ fragment. Curiosity piqued, they scanned the barcode. The digital trail led them straight back to the Cerro Azul incident, to the creature on the rocks. Within a week, those samples were quietly transferred to a joint analysis team. This wasn't just some local lab. We're talking Smithsonian biologists, NOAA marine geneticists, and even specialists from Chile's prestigious Marine Biotechnology Laboratory. Their mission was simple: prove once and for all that this was just a sloth. Close the case. But biology, it turned out, had other plans. When the team performed the first gene sequencing, they were expecting a clear result. They were looking for the DNA of Choloepus hoffmanni, the two-toed sloth common in that part of Panama. But the computer spat out a result that made their blood run cold. Only 87% of the DNA matched any known mammalian database. The other 13%? It was a black hole. It didn't match anything. Not fungal, not viral, not any known animal on land or in the sea. It was something else, unclassified. Their first thought was contamination. It had to be. So they ran the tests again and again. They sent samples to different labs. Every single time, the results came back identical. 13% of its DNA was from an organism completely unknown to science. But the real shock came when they analyzed what that unknown DNA was doing. They found high thermal tolerance markers. These are complex proteins you typically only find in one place on Earth, the deep sea, in extremophiles. These are organisms that thrive in the crushing pressure and boiling heat near volcanic vents, miles below the ocean's surface. This discovery shattered everything. How could an organism with deep-sea genetic traits end up in the highlands of Cerro Azul, miles from any coastline? It made no sense. Slowly, a wild, terrifying theory began to take shape. A theory that connected this mountain creature to a dark, abyssal scar in the seafloor right off the coast, the Panama Trench. Marine biologists on the team started digging into historical records and found something eerie. In 2009, the same year the alien was found, sonar readings from NOAA ships had recorded massive, unexplained bioluminescent plumes erupting from that very trench. They looked like volcanic upwellings, but they moved with an organic pattern. Then came the anecdotal evidence. Local fishermen had reported strange lights glowing in the water that year. They spoke of dead fish washing ashore in droves with no visible injuries, their skin peeled back as if they'd been boiled alive. What if the Panama creature wasn't from the rainforest at all? What if it came from the abyss? Was it carried inland by a flood, or did it crawl out? Just as these questions were being asked in secret labs, the mystery roared back to life. In March 2025, a Panamanian Coast Guard drone was on a routine environmental survey near Bocas del Toro. Suddenly, it detected an irregular heat signature just below the surface of the water. It was an organic mass, about the size of a human torso, radiating warmth against the cold ocean. The drone's infrared camera locked on, capturing a disturbing sight. A smooth, almost translucent form, rising slowly, rotating in the water, and then vanishing into the depths. 2 weeks later, another one appeared, this time off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia, moving north. By April, a total of 9 of these anomalies had been recorded along the Caribbean sea floor. They weren't drifting randomly. They were moving in a deliberate, coordinated pattern, like a migration. One scientist from NOAA's Marine Life Observatory, in a leaked communication, described it bluntly. They're not random heat bursts, they're coordinated. Something biological is moving down there, and it's not whales, not fish, not anything we've ever tracked before. Back in Panama City, the Smithsonian team's findings had started to leak into the wider scientific community. Dr. Marta Ruiz, a forensic zoologist and one of the few who had examined the original 2009 tissue, decided to speak out. At a closed symposium, she dropped a bombshell. She claimed the creature's skin, its epidermis, showed microfilament pores. She described them as something resembling breathing membranes, an adaptation that could work in both air and water. She paused during her talk, looking visibly unsettled, and then she said the words that sent a quiet shockwave through the room. If this organism evolved underwater, it's no longer just there, it's adapting to us. Her remarks caused an uproar. Some called it career suicide, pure speculation. But others whispered. They whispered that new data, sonar, genetic, even satellite ocean readings, were all pointing to the same conclusion. That a biological evolution event was happening right now, beneath the surface of our oceans, completely unseen. The mainstream media, of course, ignored the story. It was too wild, too unsubstantiated. But inside research circles, the Panama organism became an off-the-record obsession. Then, in August 2025, internal NOAA memos were leaked online. They referenced unverified anomalies of biological nature, officially classified as simple marine atmospheric interference. But independent scientists took the coordinates from those memos. They plotted them on a map. They lined up perfectly with hydrothermal vent clusters along the continental shelf, the exact kind of deep-sea cradles where new life could emerge, evolve, or awaken. All the evidence from the creature on the rocks in 2009 to the heat signatures in 2025 pointed to a single disturbing possibility. The Panama Alien was never extraterrestrial. It was terrestrial. But it was something from our own planet that was evolving beyond our darkest imagination. In 2009, we thought we'd found a monster, In 2025, we realized we'd found a mirror. Thank you so much for watching. If this story fascinated you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning of a much larger mystery. We'll see you in the next one. Have you ever heard of the Panama creature? It's a story that starts with a strange discovery and ends with a chilling question that hangs over the deep waters of the Gulf of Panama. Back in 2009, images of a bizarre, pale creature that washed ashore went viral. The official story quickly closed the book, calling it a decomposed sloth. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if the real story is far more unsettling? Today we're diving deep into the classified science, the sealed lab logs, and the strange events that followed, suggesting that what washed up on that Panamanian beach was not just an animal, but a sign of something new emerging from the shadows. Let's go back to the beginning. When biologists at Panama's National Secretariat of Science and Technology first received the tissue samples from this Montauk monster of Panama, they were expecting a straightforward identification. Their first guess was a sloth, maybe some other local mammal, or perhaps a known marine species that had drifted ashore. It was a routine procedure. They prepared the slides, placed them under the microscope, and anticipated a quick answer that would put the public's wild speculation to rest. But what they saw wasn't routine at all. Under the lens, the cellular structure was off. Something just didn't fit the neat categories of the animal kingdom. This initial confusion led them to run a full DNA analysis, and that's when things got truly bizarre. The lab technicians ran the sequences, expecting to see the familiar genetic markers of a sloth or another regional animal. Instead, the results that came back were baffling. The DNA profile didn't match any known species cataloged in their extensive database for the region. It was a complete blank. This wasn't just an unknown animal. Its very genetic makeup was an anomaly. The base sequencing revealed structures that, according to our understanding of biology, shouldn't occur naturally. It looked like a patchwork, a mosaic of life forms that have no business being combined. Imagine the scientists staring at their screens, seeing hybrid-like combinations of marine and terrestrial DNA strands woven together. It was like looking at the blueprint for a creature from mythology. Some of the genetic sequences were a perfect match for deep ocean extremophiles, those incredibly resilient organisms that thrive near hydrothermal vents, under crushing pressure and extreme temperatures. But right alongside that deep-sea code were sequences that matched common land-dwelling mammals. It was a biological contradiction. And then there were the other segments, the truly mysterious ones. Several long stretches of the DNA matched nothing on record, not just in Panama, but in any genetic database on Earth. It was as if a part of this creature's code was written in a language no one had ever seen before. The simple case of a decomposed animal was rapidly turning into a profound biological enigma. What in the world had they found? With their own databases coming up empty, the Panamanian scientists knew they needed more firepower. They uploaded the anomalous sequences to international genomic archives, running cross-database comparisons against millions of cataloged species from around the globe. They were searching for any parallel, any distant relative, any clue that could help them place this creature on the tree of life. The results that came back were even more shocking. The computers didn't find a match to a natural organism. Instead, they flagged several patterns that had only ever been seen in one other context: synthetic DNA experiments. These were markers associated with gene splicing and laboratory-created life. Yet, Panama's marine labs had no record of ever conducting research like this. No one had reported testing anything remotely similar, so the question became terrifyingly clear. If this was partially synthetic, where did it come from? Who made it? And why was it washing up on a public beach? The mystery deepened as the researchers looked closer at the creature's unique genetic code. They discovered something that made the hair on their arms stand up. The DNA was riddled with mutations. But these weren't the random, slow mutations of natural evolution that occur over millennia. These were mutations consistent with rapid, radical adaptation. It was as if this organism's genetic code was actively rewriting itself, responding and changing in real time. The structure suggested a biological system designed to evolve on the fly, to survive in drastically new and different environments. It wasn't just a creature, it was a survival machine, a living piece of adaptive technology. The team was no longer just identifying a species. They were confronting a biological concept that defied everything they knew. One of the lead researchers on the project was a brilliant molecular biologist named Dr. Livia Serrano. While she never spoke to the press, her words from a closed-door government briefing were later leaked by an anonymous source. What she said paints a chilling picture of the team's conclusions. According to the leak, Dr. Serrano told the panel, "We have to reframe our entire perspective. We weren't looking at a decaying animal. We were looking at a prototype of something new, something that was still trying to define what it was." Think about that for a moment. A prototype. This implies it wasn't the final version, it was an early draft, a test run, and the phrase "still trying to define what it was" suggests it was a fluid, unstable organism, perhaps one that wasn't even meant to exist in that form. It was a biological question mark, and the scientists holding it had no answers. As whispers of the lab's incredible findings began to circulate within the scientific community, the official response was swift and decisive. A wall of silence went up. Word spread that the remains, the tissue samples, and all the associated research had been quietly moved from the university lab to a secure government facility in Cologne, a port city with heavy military and commercial traffic, a place where things can easily disappear. It was moved away from prying eyes, away from public view, and away from independent scientific scrutiny. The official statements released to the public were brief and dismissive. They labeled the tissue as degraded biological material, a vague, technical-sounding term designed to end the conversation. The story of the decomposed sloth was reinforced. Case closed. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. Insiders and whistleblowers claimed that all the lab logs, the DNA sequencing data, and Dr. Serrano's reports were immediately sealed under obscure marine biosecurity laws. These are regulations typically used to prevent the spread of dangerous aquatic pathogens or to protect sensitive corporate research in aquaculture. Using them to classify the remains of a sloth was highly unusual, and it suggested that the government knew this was something far more significant. They weren't just hiding an anomaly, they were containing a potential threat or a secret they didn't want the world to know. The creature was gone. The evidence was locked away and the official story was set in stone. But the story wasn't over. Just as the public was starting to forget about the strange creature, something else began to happen. Something strange was being detected in the waters of the Gulf of Panama. Navy and commercial sonar operators started picking up unexplained shapes moving beneath the surface. These weren't submarines, they weren't whales, and they weren't schools of fish. The sonar signatures were massive, indicating biological entities far larger than even the biggest blue whales. But it wasn't just their size that was alarming. It was their movement. The motion patterns were described as irregular, erratic, and unnatural. It was as if something huge was learning how to swim, awkwardly propelling itself through the water with a jerky, powerful motion unlike any known marine animal. Were these sightings connected to the creature found on the beach? The official explanation for the sonar anomalies was equipment malfunction, or unusual oceanographic phenomena. But for those who knew about the sealed lab results, a terrifying theory began to take shape. The Panama creature was a prototype. Its DNA was a mix of land and deep-sea life. Its code was designed to adapt. What if the creature that washed ashore wasn't a failure, but a success? What if it wasn't a single entity, but one of many? What if its purpose was to adapt to the ocean environment? This leads us to a final chilling thought. The Panama creature might not have originally come from the ocean, but it was becoming part of it. The prototype that washed ashore may have been a casualty, but perhaps others survived. Perhaps they adapted, grew, and are now lurking in the depths of the Gulf of Panama. Massive, evolving, and unknown. What we saw on that beach might have been just the beginning. So, what do you think? Was the Panama creature just a poor, misidentified sloth? Or was it the first glimpse of a new form of life, engineered or alien, that is now secretly thriving in our oceans? The locked files and strange sonar echoes suggest a truth far more complex and frightening than we can imagine. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of modern history's most compelling mysteries. If you have your own theories, I'd love to read them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this exploration into the unknown, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next investigation. Stay curious, and thanks for watching. While one team of scientists was grappling with the secrets locked away in a strand of DNA, another mystery was unfolding halfway across the world, not in a sterile lab, but in the crushing, inky blackness deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. Naval researchers, stationed off the coast of Panama, were picking up sonar echoes that defied all explanation. These weren't your typical blips on the screen. They were massive, slow-moving shapes that materialized out of nowhere and then vanished just as quickly. Initially, they wrote it off as a glitch, maybe thermal interference from underwater volcanic vents, or perhaps massive pods of migrating whales. But the more data they collected, the less sense that made. The patterns just didn't match anything in the marine biology textbooks. These shapes moved with a kind of deliberate, intelligent precision. They would rise from the depths, hover as if observing, and then circle with a purpose before disappearing completely, leaving nothing but silent, empty water behind. It was as if they were ghosts in the machine, phantoms haunting the deep sea. The official reports were inconclusive, filled with technical jargon that ultimately said one thing: we don't know what this is. But curiosity is a powerful force. A privately funded oceanographic expedition, armed with state-of-the-art submersibles, decided to investigate. They wanted to replicate the Navy's sonar readings, to see these anomalies for themselves. They dove into the same coordinates, descending through layers of ever-darkening water. And while they didn't immediately find the same sonar contacts, their submersible's sensors picked up something else, something arguably even stranger: infrared anomalies. Down in the deep thermocline layer where the water temperature should be stable and frigid, their instruments registered bizarre spikes in heat. These weren't natural geothermal vents. The signatures were focused, contained, almost like an engine, a biological engine running hot, thousands of feet below the surface, cloaked in the immense pressure and cold. What kind of living creature could possibly generate that much heat in such an extreme environment? The question hung in the cramped cockpit of the submersible, as unsettling as the darkness pressing in from all sides. The team knew they were onto something unprecedented, but they had no idea how close they were to the truth. As the submersible continued its descent, the divers inside began to notice something deeply unsettling. It was a profound, unnatural silence. The deeper they went, the more the familiar sounds of the ocean faded away. The distant songs of whales, the constant crackle of snapping shrimp, even the subtle creaks and groans of the water pressure against the hull, it all just stopped. It was a dead zone, an acoustic void. The ocean itself seemed to be holding its breath, as if in anticipation of something. The silence was more terrifying than any sound could have been. It felt like they had entered a sacred, forbidden place where the normal rules of nature no longer applied. Then it happened. A sharp, distinct ping pierced the silence, echoing through their headsets. It was their own sonar, but it had found something. A contact. And then another. And another. 3 massive shapes, each estimated to be over 20 meters long, were moving in perfect formation. Their trajectories were flawless mirror images of one another, a display of coordinated movement that screamed intelligence. It wasn't the clumsy drift of a current or the random path of a creature. This was precise, almost military in its execution. The lead contact, the one in the center, paused for a beat. It ascended slightly, as if taking a final look, before all 3 shapes vanished from the sonar screen at the exact same instant. One moment they were there, solid and undeniable. The next, they were gone. The submersible crew was stunned into silence. They had seen it. The phantoms of the deep were real. The journey back to the surface was tense, every member of the team replaying the impossible encounter in their minds. But the strangest part of their ordeal was yet to come. When they finally broke the surface and brought their equipment back to the research vessel, they discovered that every single digital instrument that had recorded the event had malfunctioned. The data was gone. Drives were corrupted, backups were wiped clean, and hard copies were mysteriously lost or damaged. It was a complete and total data blackout, as if some unseen force had deliberately erased the evidence of what they had witnessed. It felt like a deliberate act of sabotage, but executed by an invisible hand. Frustration and disbelief mounted. How could every single piece of advanced, redundant technology fail at the same time? It was statistically impossible, but one researcher, an old-school oceanographer, hadn't trusted the digital systems completely. He had been taking analog notes, sketching the sonar signatures by hand in a waterproof notebook, and it was in these simple pencil sketches that the true, terrifying nature of the contacts was revealed. The shapes he had drawn weren't just abstract blobs. With the benefit of hindsight, looking at them on the surface, they bore an uncanny and horrifying resemblance to humanoid silhouettes. They were distorted, with elongated limbs and twisted outlines, as if they were half-evolved, half-adapted forms built to withstand the crushing pressures of the abyss. This revelation sent a chill through the entire crew. They weren't just tracking strange objects, they were tracking beings. But the story didn't end there. The few corrupted fragments of data that could be salvaged were sent to marine bioacousticians, experts in the sounds of the ocean. After weeks of painstaking analysis, they uncovered something else hidden within the noise, a signal that had been missed in the field. Just moments before the 3 entities vanished, their instruments had detected a sub-frequency pulse. It wasn't sonar, and it certainly wasn't mechanical. The signature was complex, rhythmic, and undeniably organic. It was a communication. The implications were staggering. Whatever these things were, they weren't just isolated, mindless creatures roaming the deep. They were intelligent. They were organized. And they were talking to each other, coordinating their actions in a way that we could barely comprehend. The patterns in their movements, the heat signatures, the coordinated disappearance, it all started to paint a chilling picture. When you put all the pieces together, one terrifying conclusion began to emerge. These beings, these silent giants of the abyss, they weren't hiding from us. Their movements weren't random. They were systematic. They were mapping our naval patrols, our research vessels, our submersibles. They were mapping us. And the biggest question of all was not what they were, but why. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of the ocean's most chilling modern mysteries. If you found this as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores the unknown. Let me know in the comments what you think these entities could be. I'd love to hear your theories. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever stared into the deep ocean and felt like something was staring back? It's a common fear, but for one deep-sea research team, it became a terrifying reality. This is the story of a mission that went so wrong, it was erased from official records. But some stories refuse to stay buried. It began with a state-of-the-art submersible, the Odyssey, hovering thousands of feet below the surface, exploring an uncharted trench. The goal was simple: map the abyss. The first diver tethered to the sub began his descent. Everything was nominal. Vitals were stable, communications were clear. And then, 43 minutes in, silence. Not a scream, not a warning, just nothing. The audio feed went dead. The crew on the Odyssey waited, their hearts pounding against their ribs. They called his name, over and over, no response. Panicked, they began to winch the tether line back up. It felt light. As the cable spooled back onto the drum, the crew chief saw it. The end of the line wasn't frayed or snapped. It was cleanly severed, cut with a precision that no rock or wreckage could explain. It looked like it had been sliced by a blade of impossible sharpness. Frantically, they reviewed the diver's helmet camera feed. The last few frames showed nothing but the inky blackness. But just for a millisecond, right before the feed cut out, there was a flicker. A faint shimmer in the water, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. But it was. It looked like something was watching, hidden in plain sight. At first, the mission leaders rationalized it. Maybe the diver had a panic attack. Maybe it was nitrogen narcosis, the notorious rapture of the deep, causing him to sever his own line in a state of delusion. It was a tragic but explainable accident. They had to believe that. So, a few days later, they sent down a second diver, this time in a different sector of the trench with enhanced safety protocols. They were cautious, they were prepared, it didn't matter, the exact same thing happened. A routine descent, a sudden inexplicable silence, and a tether line reeled back in, sliced clean. That's when the mission officially halted. Panic turned to dread. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern. The team began a painstaking review of every second of footage from the submersible's external cameras. For days they found nothing, just endless darkness and the occasional bioluminescent creature drifting by. But then, one technician, bleary-eyed from staring at a screen for 72 hours straight, saw something. He rewound the footage from the night the first diver disappeared. At 02:37 a.m., just moments before the communication loss, a colossal shadow moved beneath the submersible. At first they thought it was a whale, but its movement was all wrong. It wasn't the graceful, powerful glide of a sperm whale. This shape, it flexed. It elongated, then seemed to fold back on itself in a way that defied the laws of biology. It was fluid, almost unnatural. As the sub's lights caught the edge of the shape, the cameras glitched for a split second. But in that final, corrupted frame, two pale circular reflections appeared within the darkness. They weren't bright, just a faint glimmer. They looked like eyes. Eyes adjusting to the sudden light, staring right up at them. The official report was classified, the footage confiscated. But in the world of deep-sea exploration, secrets have a way of surfacing. A small, corrupted fragment of the video was leaked. Digital analysts and amateur sleuths around the world downloaded the grainy file and began their work. They enhanced it, sharpened it, stabilized it frame by frame. What emerged from the digital noise was horrifying. The contours of the shape were vaguely humanoid, but grotesquely distorted, as if unfinished. Some said it looked like a featureless man, a blank slate sculpted from the abyss. Others saw a body still in the process of evolving, its very structure adapting to the crushing pressure of the deep in real time. But the visual was only half the story. The real breakthrough came from the audio. During the post-dive analysis, sound engineers were trying to clean up the static from the hydrophone recordings. Buried deep beneath the hum of the submersible's engines, they found a faint, rhythmic reverberation. It wasn't machine noise, and it wasn't any known marine animal. They isolated the sound, slowed it down, and amplified it. What they heard sent a chill through the entire lab. It was a pattern: 4 distinct pulses, a moment of silence, and then 4 pulses again. A biologist on the team recognized it immediately. Days before the first dive, their sonar had detected 3 large, unidentified biological entities moving in the trench. Their sonar had sent out a 4-pulse ping. This sound, it was a perfect mimicry. It was a response. Whatever was down there hadn't just seen them. It had listened to their technology and learned to talk back. That was the final straw. The project led, a brilliant and famously unflappable scientist named Dr. Nayla Esteban, shut down the entire operation indefinitely. In her final hastily recorded briefing before she resigned, she didn't offer explanations or theories. Her voice was strained, her face pale. She said only one thing before walking out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. "They know we're here. They've been listening longer than we've been looking." Her words hung in the air, a terrifying conclusion to a mission that had started with such promise. The abyss was not empty, and it was aware. Weeks turned into months. The official story was equipment failure. The Odyssey was decommissioned. But the corporation behind the mission couldn't just leave millions of dollars of equipment and data at the bottom of the ocean. So they sent one last thing down: an unmanned, heavily armored drone. Its mission was simple: retrieve the lost data capsule from the submersible and get out. The drone descended into the blackness. It reached the target depth, located the capsule, and then its signal vanished. For 2 days there was nothing. The team assumed it was lost, another victim of the trench. But on the 3rd day a recovery beacon activated. The drone had resurfaced miles from its last known position, floating aimlessly. When the recovery ship pulled it from the water, the crew was speechless. The drone's military-grade titanium hull was scarred and damaged, but not in the way they expected. It was covered in a strange organic residue that seemed almost fused to the metal itself. It looked like skin, melted and bonded to the hull under incredible heat and pressure. The drone's power systems were completely dead, its circuits fried. Samples of the bizarre residue were rushed to top marine biology labs for analysis. What they found was the most disturbing discovery of all. The substance contained mitochondrial structures that were shockingly similar to human DNA. But they weren't identical. There were differences, strange advanced adaptation markers woven into the genetic code. They found genes for extreme oxygen efficiency, far beyond any human capability. They found markers for cellular compression, allowing tissues to withstand pressures that would turn a person to jelly. And they found genes for rapid, almost instantaneous tissue repair. These were all traits perfectly consistent with survival and evolution in the deepest, most hostile environment on Earth. The implication was staggering. If the DNA was related to ours but adapted for the abyss, then whatever is down there didn't arrive from another world. It came from us, a lost branch of the human tree, a forgotten evolutionary path that took a turn into the darkness centuries or millennia ago. We don't know. But the evidence suggests that something has been down there evolving in total silence, adapting to a world without light. And we, with our noisy machines and bright lights, just announced our presence. The real question isn't what they are, but what they think of us, their long-lost cousins who stayed in the sun. We may have been looking into the dark, but we forgot that the dark has had a very, very long time to learn how to look back. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the unknown. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more mysteries from the edges of our world. Let me know in the comments what you think is lurking in the abyss. Stay curious and stay safe. The storm had been building for days over the Pacific Trench, yet the research vessel Aquila stayed anchored, its instruments trained on the coordinates where the divers vanished. Dr. Nyla Esteban's replacement, a quiet systems biologist named Dr. Ian Harker, was under strict orders to resume the operation, not to investigate what had happened but to recover the lost transmission buoy that went silent 6 months earlier. But when the retrieval drone surfaced, it wasn't silent anymore. The buoy's signal was active, transmitting on a channel no human had programmed. At first, the data stream was just garbled sonar returns, chaotic bursts of sound, then silence. But after several hours, the pattern stabilized into something unmistakable, a repeating structured pulse code. Each cluster of tones was mathematically precise, cycling every 42 seconds. The intervals matched the exact time-lapse between the last diver's heartbeat recordings. NASA's Deep Signal Array was brought in to cross-analyze the transmission. Their findings stunned the team. The frequency embedded within the pulses wasn't natural. It contained phase shifts consistent with digital modulation, like a language forming out of acoustic pressure waves. Someone, or something, was responding. When translated through frequency-matching algorithms, the message rendered only one sequence of repeating coordinates. Those coordinates didn't lead to the trench. They pointed 120 miles inland, deep beneath the Panamanian coast, the same region where the original alien carcass was found in 2009. For hours, the command center debated, was this coincidence, interference, or something more intelligent? But the real shock came when technicians visualized the waveform as a 3D spectrogram. The shape it formed wasn't random. It resembled a human silhouette, stretched and distorted as if emerging from below. At its center, faint but undeniable, was a second waveform overlaid like a heartbeat, only inverted. By now, local seismographs began picking up deep harmonic tremors, rhythmic and synchronized with the pulses. The ocean was responding. Dr. Harker tried to triangulate the signal's depth using standard sonar sweeps, but every attempt caused the return pattern to change, adapting, mimicking the frequency of their scans. It was almost conversational. One of the assistants described it best. It's not calling for help. It's calling us back. 2 nights later, the entire signal shifted. The tone dropped by exactly 1.3 hertz, a range associated with biological resonance, the kind emitted by whales and deep-sea cephalopods. But this was far stronger. The pressure sensors detected displacement, as though something vast had moved along the ocean floor toward the continental shelf. Then the final broadcast came through, a burst transmission lasting precisely 77 seconds, encoded in a way human systems could barely process. When decrypted, the translation software produced a short text. They were not meant to surface. Silence followed. Every instrument on Aquila shut down simultaneously. The next morning, the buoy was gone, torn from its moorings. Weeks later, fishermen off Panama reported a low hum rising from the ocean at night, a pulse that made the water vibrate. Some claimed to see faint blue lights beneath the surface, moving in perfect formation, not mechanical, not random. If the Panama entity was ever just one organism, it isn't anymore. It's communicating, adapting, multiplying. And for the first time, scientists are forced to confront a terrifying possibility. What if these beings didn't arrive here? What if they've been waiting, evolving, until we made enough noise for them to answer? It started with a tremor, a vibration so faint that the world's most advanced hydrophones dismissed it as a distant murmur from the Earth's crust. a deep, steady hum echoing from the abyss of the Pacific. But this was no tectonic noise. Within days, the frequency began to spread. Undersea cables, the arteries of our digital world, flickered with phantom interference. Military sonar systems from the South China Sea to the Californian coast lit up with anomalies, vast moving shapes that defied all classification. Along the Ring of Fire, seismic sensors registered something impossible. Powerful energy pulses that weren't traveling through the rock beneath, but laterally through the water itself. Aboard the research vessel Aquila, Dr. Eris Thorne was the first to see the truth hidden in the static. He stared at his monitors, his face illuminated by the cascade of raw signal data. The harmonic patterns weren't random. They weren't noise. They followed a precise repeating rhythm, a cadence he recognized with a growing sense of dread. It was the frequency of dreaming, the same electrical signature as a human brain deep in REM sleep. Thorne leaned back, a cold realization washing over him. The ocean, it seemed, was thinking. Soon the impossible became undeniable. Satellite images designed to track weather and currents revealed something else entirely. Huge regions of the Pacific were warming up, not in the chaotic patterns of climate change, but in vast, perfect, symmetrical shapes. It was as if a hidden engine was generating heat with intelligent design. Marine biologists, tracking deep-sea ecosystems, sent frantic reports. Entire species, from the ancient Greenland shark to the elusive giant squid, were migrating in unison. They weren't fleeing or hunting. They were being drawn toward these new heat zones in flawless geometric spirals, guided by an invisible hand. Then, the world went dark. Across a string of naval research stations from Guam to Hawaii, the power grids overloaded and died in the exact same instant. Each blackout was preceded by a massive magnetic surge, identical in signature to the one first detected near Panama. When the backup generators kicked in and the systems rebooted, the sonar screens painted a terrifying picture. Kilometers-wide columns of unimaginable density were ascending from the crushing depths, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. The data was chillingly clear. Something ancient and colossal, long dormant in the cradle of the deep, was finally stirring. As panic began to ripple through the global scientific community, the anomalies multiplied. Environmental satellites now tasked with watching the oceans captured bizarre phenomena. Coral beds, once thought lifeless at night, began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. Major ocean currents, the planet's circulatory system, were reversing their flow, defying all known physics. And from orbit, another pattern emerged. Massive schools of fish, millions strong, were arranging themselves into complex mathematical shapes. One symbol appeared again and again, from the coast of Japan to the shores of Chile, a spiral encircling an arc. It was the exact same symbol that had been hidden in the spectrogram of the mysterious return signal. From the Aquila, Dr. Thorne addressed a hastily assembled Global Science Council. His voice, broadcast over a secure network, was steady, but his conclusion sent a shockwave through the virtual room. The ocean is no longer just reacting to an external stimulus, he stated, his image flickering on dozens of screens. It's self-organizing. These signals, this heat, this migration, it's not interference, it's communication. While the world's leaders grappled with this revelation, the strangeness intensified on the Panama coast. Fishermen pulled up their nets to find not fish, but strange translucent filaments clinging to the mesh. These gelatinous strands pulsed with a faint, blue bioluminescence, warm to the touch. Local divers, returning from the reef, spoke of a seabed that had transformed overnight. New ridges and deep shimmering cracks had appeared where flat sand had been just a week before. Samples retrieved from these new hydrothermal vents contained something that defied biology. Organic silicon lattices, crystalline structures that could not exist in living tissue. The world's media, initially dismissive, could no longer ignore the story. The breaking point came when multiple underwater internet cables spanning the Pacific were severed at the exact same moment. This wasn't an earthquake or a submarine mishap. The cuts were clean, precise. When the rupture points were mapped, they formed a near-perfect circle, thousands of kilometers in diameter, and at the exact center of that circle were the coordinates where the Panama entity was first discovered. The message was clear. Something was isolating the continents. Then the pulse returned. But this time, it wasn't a faint hum detected by sensitive instruments. This time, it was global. Every sonar array, every sub-oceanic microphone, every device tuned to the planet's heartbeat picked it up at once. It was a single resonant tone so deep and powerful that it was felt in the bones of every person on every coast. It was a vibration that shook the very foundations of our world. And within that hum, there was structure. There was language. AI decoders, running on the world's most powerful supercomputers, frantically tried to make sense of the signal. The syntax was identical to human language, but the vocabulary was utterly alien. After hours of processing, fragments began to emerge, and across every translation, in every language, one chilling phrase became clear: "We are the current." Moments later, satellite feeds showed the Pacific Ocean darkening. A vast shadow, larger than any continent, was expanding outward from the epicenter, an ink stain spreading beneath the waves. All at once, chaos erupted. Cargo ships reported their compasses spinning wildly. Whales, in a synchronized global event, breached the surface by the thousands, and across the world's oceans, plankton blooms ignited, setting the surface ablaze in an electric blue firestorm. The ocean was alive. The ocean was aware. In the aftermath, as humanity held its collective breath, our satellites detected something new. Powerful electromagnetic surges were pulsing from the ocean into orbit, like a beacon being answered. The energy readings were staggering, measured not in gigawatts, but in what scientists could only describe as living wattage, an output far beyond anything our technology could ever hope to replicate. The realization hit the scientific community like a tidal wave. This was no isolated organism, no single sea monster. The Panama entity was merely a fragment, an emissary, a single cell of something infinitely larger, something ancient and vast that was awakening from a slumber of eons, right here, beneath our planet's most mysterious frontier. The ocean was no longer just a body of water filled with life. It had become a single conscious system, a planetary-scale mind that was reacting, remembering, and reshaping itself before our very eyes. And as the deep resonant pulse intensified, growing stronger with every passing hour, one terrifying question echoed in the silence between the heartbeats of the world. If the ocean has awakened, what does it want from us? Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the unknown. If these mysteries of the deep fascinate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Stay curious and stay safe.